In this house, every floorboard held its own story. I knew them all by heart, where to step to keep from creaking in the middle of the night, where the floor sagged more under my feet. 38 years in the same walls is no joke. Sometimes I felt like the house was an extension of myself, my third lung. The pictures on the walls, the worn armrests of the chair, even the crack in the ceiling in the bedroom. Everything was as familiar as the wrinkles on my own face. Since Elizabeth had left 5 years ago, many people had advised him to sell the house. Too big for a lonely old man, too many memories. But that's exactly why I didn't want to sell it. It was where my memories lived. Here was where I could hear her laugh when I covered my eyes and listened to the silence. Here, in this living room, was where she and I listened to vinyl records on Saturday nights. She loved Ella Fitzgerald, and I loved to watch her listen to music with my eyes closed. I usually started the day with a cup of black coffee. Elizabeth always grumbled that coffee would make my blood pressure skyrocket, but some habits are too pleasant to give up. Especially when you're 78 and you're already realizing that it's not about whether you'll live 5 years longer, but how exactly you're going to live the rest of your time. That morning, I was stirring sugar in my cup when the phone rang. It was Agatha, my daughter. Agatha rarely called, only when she needed something. Apparently, she had less maternal genes than my pragmatism. "Daddy, are you okay?" Her voice sounded suspiciously cheerful. "Are you taking your meds?" "Do you think I'd be talking to you if I wasn't?" I replied, sipping my coffee. "Did something happen to you? Why did something happen right away?" Agatha was always annoyed when I guessed her motives. "Just asking how you're doing. Hubert and I were talking about you yesterday." Of course we did. If Agathe and Hubert were talking about me, they must have wanted something, maybe money. Although lately, they've been more interested in my house. Ever since their friend's realtor told them how much real estate in our neighborhood could be worth, their concern for me has become even more intense. "We were thinking about coming over on Sunday," Agatha continued. "Ashley wants to show you her new gymnastics program. Ashley is my granddaughter, Agatha's daughter, a 16-year-old girl who was a mixture of the worst traits of her parents. Narcissistic and calculating like her father Bradford, and inconsiderate like Agatha. I always tried to be gentle with her, though. After all, children don't choose their parents. "I was going to the library on Sunday," I lied. "I went to the library on Thursdays, but there was no one to check it out." "The library?" Agatha sounded incredulous. "Daddy, don't you think it's too late to read so much at your age?" "What am I supposed to do at my age? Watch TV and wait to die?" "Don't be so dramatic," Agatha sighed. "Okay, we'll be there this afternoon. Just please wear a normal shirt, not that stretchy sweater of yours. And comb your hair. Bradford wants to take some pictures for his Instagram." Even while visiting their elderly father, they thought about their image on social media. "Look what caring kids we are. We don't forget the old man dad." In reality, though, they only remembered me when they needed something. I knew that Bradford, Agatha's husband, needed these photos for his work profile. He was a family financial consultant and liked to show off his familyness. After talking to Agatha, my mood soured. I finished my coffee and went into the living room. There were framed photographs on the mantelpiece. Elizabeth on our wedding day, young, with clear eyes that showed faith in the future. Hubert on graduation day, a serious young man, so much like me in my youth. Agatha with her doll, the only toy she truly loved. A family photo from our last vacation together when the kids were still teenagers. We were still a family then. Not perfect, but a family. Elizabeth had a knack for smoothing over sharp edges, finding compromises. After she died, those edges were exposed, hurt worse. The money I gave Hubert for the down payment on the house, he never paid back, though he promised. Helping Agatha pay for college turned into expecting me to pay for her wedding, her first car, and everything else. I loved my children, but over the years I saw their flaws more and more clearly. Hubert with his perpetual financial schemes that never worked. Agatha, with her constant dissatisfaction with her life that somehow everyone around her had to pay for. They weren't bad people, just not what I'd hoped to raise them to be. Elizabeth said I was too hard on them. Maybe she was right, but she didn't see what they'd become since her death. Even more aloof, even less interested in my life. Except in my house, they showed genuine interest. Last month, when I went into the hospital with a microstroke, the first thing Hubert asked was, "What about the will, Dad? Have you updated it?" Not, "How are you feeling?" or "What can I do to help?" Agatha at least brought fruit then, even though she'd forgotten I couldn't eat oranges because of the medication. The nurse then took the basket for herself. I looked out the window at the backyard. The apple tree that Elizabeth and I had planted the first year after we bought the house had long since sprawled and matured. I like to think of that apple tree as a metaphor for our lives. We too had put down roots here, grown, bore fruit. Too bad the fruit had a bitterness to it. Shakespeare the cat rubbed against my legs, reminding me that it was time to feed him. Shakespeare had come into our lives 10 years ago, a skinny black kitten with a white spot on his chest like a bow tie. Elizabeth immediately named him Shakespeare, said he looked like a playwright going to a premiere. The cat had outlived its owner and was now keeping me company in a house too big for one person. "Be right back, buddy," I told him, heading for the kitchen. The day went on as usual. I read the paper, went to the store for groceries, and had a few words with my neighbor Frank. Frank was about 15 years younger than me and still worked part-time as an engineer. We weren't close, but we maintained a good, neighborly relationship. Occasionally, we'd exchange a few words about the weather or the fact that the property tax had gone up again. "How's your health, Wilbur?" Frank asked, trimming his hedge. "Alive so far," I replied with a chuckle. "The doctors say I'm in great shape for my age." "That's good," Frank nodded. "Your kids have been visiting you a lot lately. I thought maybe something was wrong." I tensed up. "So that's it. So Hubert and Agatha came over when I wasn't home. I wonder what they wanted." "They must have missed me," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "I guess so." Frank didn't believe me. "By the way, some guy came to see you. Said he was from the real estate office. I told him you weren't selling the house." "Thanks, Frank." I felt my insides tighten. "That's a good point. At home, the first thing I did was check to make sure everything was in place. Everything looked untouched, but I had the feeling that someone had been going through my things. The desk drawer where I kept the papers for the house was closed, but the folders weren't in the order I usually put them in. The photo album on the bookshelf had its spine facing outward, though I always put it with its spine facing inward so it wouldn't burn out in the sun. Little things that others wouldn't have noticed, but I was always attentive to detail, a habit developed over years of teaching history. Little things often tell more than big statements, and now those little things were telling me that my children were up to something. In the evening, Hubert called. He rarely called just for fun. He usually had some specific purpose in mind. "Hi, Dad." His voice sounded unnaturally cheerful, like a salesman trying to sell a product he didn't need. "How are you feeling?" "Fine," I answered briefly. "What happened? Why did it happen right away?" Hubert was obviously trying to sound offended. "Just calling to see how you're doing. After that stroke." "Microstroke," I corrected him. "The doctors said everything's fine. I'm taking my meds." Of course," Hubert paused. "It's just that Agatha and I were talking and we thought you might want to think about, not living alone in such a big house. Here it is. I've been waiting to have this conversation since the day I got home from the hospital." "I like my house," I said, "and I'm doing just fine." "Yeah, but what if you fall again? Or there's another, episode? You'll be alone, with no help." "I have a panic button," I reminded you. I had installed an emergency call system after my microstroke, though I doubted I'd ever use it. "Dad, be realistic." Hubert sounded impatient. "You're 78. You need care, supervision." Agatha and I found a great place, Sunny Hills. It's not a nursing home, it's a sort of, uh, an active retirement community. I almost laughed. Active retirement community was what they were calling nursing homes now to make them sound less depressing. I don't need any community, I cut off. I'm staying in my house. Dad, don't be selfish, Hubert said offensively. We're worried about you. And besides, it's a lot of money to keep a house this big. Taxes, repairs, heating. That's what it's all about. They weren't worried about my health. They were worried about me wasting their inheritance on the house. I'm getting by, I said. My pension is enough. But it's unsustainable. Hubert was always obsessed with rationality, especially when it came to money. You could sell the house, invest the money, live off the interest. Hubert, I interrupted him, feeling a wave of irritation rising in me. I'm not going to sell the house, and I'm not going to move to an active retirement community. This is my home, and I'm going to stay here until the end. There was silence on the phone. Then Hubert sighed, the same sigh that meant my father is being unreasonable again. All right, he said at last, but we'll come back to this conversation. By the way, have you seen your deed to the house? It would be a good idea to check to see if your tax returns are in order. I'm tense, so they were going through my paperwork after all. Everything is in perfect order, I answered dryly. Good night, Hubert. I hung up the phone, feeling heavy in my heart. Elizabeth and I had once dreamed of gathering in this house as a family, of our children bringing grandchildren, of sitting on the veranda and watching the sunset, holding hands even after 50 years of marriage. The reality turned out to be different. Elizabeth left before we could celebrate our 45th anniversary. The kids grew up feeling like the world owed them something, and I was alone in a house full of memories that my own children were now trying to take away from me. I went to the window. The sun was setting, coloring the sky orange and pink. On the neighboring property, Frank's kids were playing with the dog. Their laughter came to me muffled, as if from another world, a world to which I no longer belonged. What do you say, Shakespeare? I asked the cat, who had jumped on the windowsill and was now washing his face, looking at the birds outside the window. You and I seem to think our children think we've lived too long. Shakespeare blinked his green eyes as if in agreement. Unlike humans, the cat has never tried to change my mind or make me do anything I don't want to do. Maybe that's why I'd always preferred the company of animals to that of most humans. I didn't yet know how I would counter Hubert and Agatha's plans. But one thing I knew for sure was that I wasn't going to give up without a fight. This house was my last stronghold, my refuge, and I would not let my children take it away from me, even if they had to wait for me to die longer than they had hoped. They arrived on Sunday as promised. Hubert, his wife Heather, Agatha and her husband Bradford, and their daughter Ashley, a whole delegation. They didn't usually come all together. At most, Agatha and Hubert, and then separately. The fact that they were all there confirmed my suspicions. Something big was going on. Hubert had brought bags of food from the restaurant, some fancy salads and sushi. I wasn't much for raw fish, but I kept my mouth shut. They were taking care of me. Dad, you look chipper. Agatha kissed my cheek. She smelled of expensive perfume, too strong, as if she'd worn it on purpose before meeting her father, who might not notice the subtlety. For her age, you mean? I grinned. No, just chipper, she said with a strained smile. Isn't that right, Hubert? Hubert, who was spreading food on the table in the living room, turned around with a fake smile. Of course. You look great, Dad. I saw them look at each other, a quick, barely perceptible exchange of glances. It's the look of accomplices who fear their plot will be discovered before it's time. Bradford, Agatha's husband, meanwhile, was pacing around the living room with his phone, taking pictures. He was always obsessed with social media, documenting every step of his life, as if an event wasn't considered real without being posted online. Bradford, why don't you say hello first? I couldn't take it anymore. He turned around as if he'd just noticed my presence. "Oh, sure, Wilbur." He extended his hand for a handshake. "Just wanted to capture this wonderful family moment. Do you mind if we take some photos together? For my financial planning Instagram. You know, to show how important it is to take care of the older generation." "I'm not a prop for your Instagram, Bradford," I replied dryly. "Dad?" Agatha interjected with a note of annoyance. "Bradford just wants to take some family photos. What's the big deal?" I knew what the big deal was. Bradford used the caring son-in-law image to promote his financial counseling business. Help your parents ensure a dignified old age. Contact Bradford Pierce. Hypocrisy in its purest form. "Okay," I gave in. "Let's just eat first." We sat down in the living room. I in my favorite chair, the rest of us on the couch in chairs brought in from the kitchen. Heather, Hubert's wife, looked at my furniture with ill-concealed contempt. She always thought my taste was old-fashioned, although it was actually Elizabeth's taste. She chose most of the furniture. "So," Hubert began as everyone took their food, "Agatha and I wanted to talk to you about something important, Papa." I guessed. I nodded. Why else would you all come at the same time? Again, that quick exchange of glances between Hubert and Agatha. They always did that when I was more clever than they expected me to be. "The thing is," Hubert continued, "we're all very worried about you. After that episode." "Microstroke," I corrected. "You can call things by their proper names." "Yes, microstroke." Hubert nodded. "You see, Dad, these things often happen again, and the next time can be much more serious. The doctor said the risk of having another stroke is low if I take my medication," I objected. "Which I do." "But you live alone," Agatha interjected. "What if something happens at night, or when you're in the bathroom? Who's going to help?" "I have a panic button," I reminded her, pointing to the device around my neck. "And the neighbors are checking to make sure everything's okay." "Neighbors?" Heather snorted. "They don't even come in the house. How would they know if you fell in the bedroom somewhere?" "Frank calls every night," I said. "And if I don't answer, he comes to check." That was a lie. Frank didn't call me every night, but I didn't want them to know how lonely I really was. "Dad," Hubert set his food aside and leaned forward. "We found a great place for you. Sunny Hills isn't just a nursing home, it's a whole community. It's got everything. Medical staff around the clock, activities, its own library." "I already told you on the phone," I interrupted. "I'm not moving anywhere." "But you didn't even look!" Agatha exclaimed. "We took the brochures. Do you want to see them?" Without waiting for my answer, she took the glossy brochures out of her bag and handed them to me. On the cover were smiling, well-groomed older people, too happy, too healthy for their age. Typical advertising photography. "Sunny Hills, where life's sunset becomes a new dawn," I read the slogan aloud. "God, who writes such nonsense?" "Dad," Agatha's voice was steely, "we've worked very hard to find a good place for you. You could show a little gratitude." "Gratitude?" I put the brochure aside. "For trying to evict me from my own home?" "Nobody's evicting you," Bradford interjected in his professional financial advisor's tone. "We're proposing to optimize your assets. The house is frozen equity. If you sell it, you'll have enough money to live comfortably in Sunny Hills and still have some money left over for." "For what?" I looked him straight in the eye. "An inheritance for you?" There was a heavy silence in the room. Ashley, Agatha's daughter, who had been engrossed in her phone until then, looked up, sensing the tension. "Dad," Hubert's voice became almost pleading, "no one is talking about the inheritance. We're talking about your safety, your quality of life." "My quality of life is quite good," I cut him off, "and I'm safe in my home." "But the house is too big for you," Agatha continued to press. "You don't use the second floor nearly enough. Why pay to heat the whole house, for cleaning, for roof repairs that you'll need soon? So that's what this is about. They were afraid I would squander their potential inheritance on home maintenance. "I'm doing fine," I said firmly. "My pension and savings are enough." "But it's unsustainable." Hubert couldn't stand it. "You could live more comfortably on the same money." Heather, who had been silent until then, suddenly stood up and began to walk around the room, looking at the furniture, paintings, bookshelves. "You have so much stuff, Wilbur," she said, running her finger along the spines of the books. "Where will you put it all if you decide to move?" "I'm not going to move," I said, watching her gaze appraisingly at the antique clock Elizabeth and I had bought on our anniversary. "But if you do—" Heather picked up the porcelain figurine. "This thing looks valuable. Is it antique?" "Yes." I felt my insides tighten. "It's from the 18th century. Elizabeth got it from her grandmother." 18th century. Heather carefully set the statue back down. "It must be worth a fortune." "It's priceless to me," I said. "Because of who it belonged to, not because of its market value." Heather nodded, but I could see the greedy glint in her eyes. She was already mentally evaluating everything in my house, figuring out what she could sell and what she could keep. "Sunny Hills doesn't have a lot of room for things," Agatha said, watching Heather. "But we could help you pick out what's important. And the rest? Sell it?" I finished for her. "Store it," she corrected quickly. "We have room in the garage." I doubted the things sent to their garage would ever see the light of day again. Most likely they'd be sold at the first opportunity. "What about Shakespeare?" I asked, nodding at the cat who was watching from the windowsill. "Do they allow animals at Sunny Hills?" Hubert and Agatha exchanged glances. "Well," Hubert began, "actually, they don't, but we could take him in." "Hubert, you're allergic to cats," I reminded him, "and Agatha Bradford can't have animals in the house." "He could live in the garage," Heather suggested. "Shakespeare never lived outside or in a garage," I said, feeling the anger rising in me. "And he wouldn't." "Daddy." Agatha tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. "We just want you to be better. We just want you to be safe. And for you to have my house," I added. "What does a house have to do with it?" Hubert exclaimed with feigned indignation. "We're talking about your health, are we?" I looked at them in turn. "Then why didn't you offer me help around the house? A caregiver for a few hours a day? Maybe remodeling the bathroom to make it safer? Why just sell the house and move into a nursing home?" They exchanged glances again. Obviously, they hadn't expected such a question. "Caregivers are expensive," Hubert finally said. "And remodeling the house is a temporary solution. Sooner or later, you'll need constant care anyway." "Or maybe I'll die sooner," I said bluntly, "and you won't have to spend money on a nurse or a nursing home." "Daddy." Agatha looked genuinely shocked. "How can you say that? And how can you pretend to care about me when all you really care about is my house?" I got up from my chair, feeling my heart pounding. "You haven't even asked me what I want, what's important to me. You just decided you knew better." "We know you're attached to this house," Bradford began in his professional tone. "But sometimes you have to look at a situation objectively. Emotional attachment to real estate is—" "Shut up, Bradford," I cut him off. It was the first time I'd ever been so rude. "It's not real estate. This is my house. It's where I've lived with Elizabeth for almost 40 years. Where you and Agatha grew up," I looked at Hubert. "Where we celebrated birthdays, Christmas, anniversaries. It's not just walls and a roof. It's my life." A heavy silence hung in the room. Even Ashley pulled away from the phone, looking at me in surprise. "Grandpa," she said suddenly, "can I film your house for TikTok? I have an idea for a video. My grandfather's house. Time travel." I looked at my granddaughter, not believing my ears. Even at a moment like this, all she was thinking about was her social media. "No, Ashley, you can't," I replied. "My house is not the setting for your videos." "But why not?" She pouted her lips. "It would be cool. Vintage style is trending right now." "Ashley," Agatha snapped at her. "Not now." Hubert, seeing that the situation was getting out of hand, decided to change tactics. "Dad," he said in a conciliatory tone, "we didn't mean to upset you. We really care about you. Just think about it, okay? Look at the brochures. Why don't we take a tour of Sunny Hills? Just to see. No strings attached." I knew it was a trap. If I agreed to just to see, they'd take it as a first step toward agreement. That's how salespeople work. Get the customer to say yes to little things first, then take them to the big purchase. "I'm not going to Sunny Hills," I said firmly. "And I'm not going to sell the house. This is my final decision." "But Daddy," Agatha tried to take my hand again, "you have to think about the future, about your health." "I think about my health every day," I answered. "And you know what's the worst thing for it? Stress. Like your own kids trying to evict you from your house." "Nobody's evicting me," Hubert exclaimed. "We're offering a better option." "A better option for whom?" I asked. "For me or for you?" Silence again. They didn't know what to say because the truth was too obvious. They were thinking of themselves first. "You know what?" I said, standing up. "I'm tired. Thanks for lunch, but I need to rest." "But we haven't finished discussing this," Agatha protested. "I am done," I replied. "My decision won't change." Hubert sighed, the same sigh of disappointment I'd heard from him since childhood when he didn't get what he wanted. "Okay, Dad," he said, standing up. "We'll talk about this later when you're in a better mood." "There will be no later," I objected. The subject was closed. They gathered reluctantly, exchanging glances and whispering. I stood by the door, waiting for them to leave. Heather took one last look around the living room, as if mentally taking inventory. Bradford had managed to take a few pictures for his Instagram, caring son-in-law helping an elderly relative. Ashley sighed defiantly, unhappy that she wasn't allowed to take a vintage video. When they finally left, I closed the door and leaned my back against it, feeling both relieved and anxious. Shakespeare jumped down from the windowsill and rubbed against my legs as if trying to comfort me. "Well, buddy," I said to him, "looks like we need to come up with a defense plan. They're not going to back down that easily." I went into the living room and sat in my chair, looking at the Sunny Hills brochures that Agatha had forgotten on the table. The glossy cover showed happy seniors playing croquet on a perfectly mowed lawn. It looked more like an ad for an expensive resort than a real place for old people. I knew what these places were really like. My friend Albert, with whom we taught high school together, had spent the last 2 years of his life in a similar community. I used to visit him there. Behind the glossy facade were cramped rooms, indifferent staff, and the smell of disinfection. Albert faded there day by day, losing interest in life, in the books he once loved, even in his own memories. No, I wasn't going to end up like this. My home was part of me, part of my history. Here I could feel Elizabeth's presence, hear the echoes of my children's voices when they were young and not yet thinking of my inheritance. Here were my books, my memories, my freedom. I picked up the pamphlets and tossed them in the trash. Then I went to the window and looked outside. Hubert's car was still parked outside. They were talking about something inside. They were probably discussing how to break my resistance, how to get me to do what they wanted. Well, they were going to have to try. I wasn't going to give up without a fight. This house was mine, and I intended to keep it until my last breath, even if it meant confronting my own children. Shakespeare jumped onto the windowsill next to me and stared at Hubert's car, as if realizing that our opponents were there. I patted him on the head. "Don't worry, old boy," I told him. "I won't let them send you to live in the garage." The cat blinked, looking at me with his intelligent green eyes, and I swore to myself that I would do everything I could to keep our house. Not just for myself, but for Shakespeare, and for Elizabeth's memory, and for everything that was truly important to me. I did not realize at once that I had lost. It happened gradually, like the coming of twilight. At first, almost imperceptibly, then faster and faster until only darkness remains. For 3 weeks after the family council, they didn't leave me alone. They called every day, arrived unannounced, brought in doctors and social workers who happened to be passing by. That all changed on Thursday when I fell in the bathroom. Nothing serious. Slipped on the wet floor, bruised my hip. Didn't break anything, not even a bruise. But Frank heard the noise and called an ambulance, and they called Hubert as an emergency contact. Hubert rushed to the hospital with paperwork ready to go. Something about temporary guardianship, about incapacity, about the need for medical supervision. I didn't read it. My eyes were double-visioned from the pills they'd given me for the pain. I signed it, just so they'd cut me loose and let me sleep. It was a mistake. When I woke up the next morning, Hubert and Agatha were already planning my move to Sunny Hills. I tried to protest, saying I'd been tricked, that I hadn't agreed to live there permanently. But the papers were signed and my voice suddenly ceased to mean anything. The move took place a week later. They let me take the bare minimum of things: clothes, a few books, a picture of Elizabeth, a desk clock. Shakespeare had to be left behind. Hubert swore he would take care of him. I didn't believe it, but there was no choice. Sunny Hills turned out to be nothing like the glossy pictures in the brochure. The building was old, with cracked plaster and the smell of chlorine in the hallways. My room would be more accurately called a cubicle, a bed, a nightstand, a closet, and a tiny desk by the window overlooking the parking lot. The communal dining room served bland food, and the TV in the communal living room was constantly on, tuned to a TV store channel. "It's temporary," Agatha said as she and Hubert left me on my first day, "just until you get used to it. Then we can think about a bigger room." I knew it was a lie. I also realized that their temporarily meant permanently. They were already making plans for my house. I could hear Hubert on the phone with some contractor about replacing the windows. For the first few days, I just sat by the window, looking out at the parking lot and trying to come to terms with my new reality. I spent hours watching the cars come and go, the nurses rushing in for a smoke break, and the food being brought in for the kitchen. It was like looking out the window of my prison cell at the free world. The staff was polite, but aloof. To them, I was just another old man with a medical chart and a list of pills to take at a certain time. No one was interested in who I used to be, what I loved, what I dreamed about. No one asked about the picture of Elizabeth I'd put on the nightstand. Hubert and Agatha visited me once a week. They came together, sat down on the edge of the bed. There was only one chair in the room, asked how I was without listening to the answer, and immediately went on to discuss the house. "We've started renovating the kitchen," Hubert said on their second visit. "You know, so many things are outdated in there. The stove, the refrigerator, the countertops." "I replaced the refrigerator 3 years ago," I reminded him. "It's practically brand new." "Yeah, but it didn't fit in with the new design," Agatha shrugged. "We decided to go minimalist. White, chrome, black accents. Elizabeth liked warm colors. Our kitchen was cozy with wooden countertops and honey-colored cabinets. On the windows hung curtains with small floral patterns that she had sewn herself. "What about my things?" I asked. "The library, the vinyl record collection?" They glanced at each other, the same exchange of looks I knew so well and hated so much. "We gave most of the books to the town library," Hubert said. "They were grateful for the donation." "Donation?" I felt a wave of anger rising in me. It wasn't a donation. It was my books. "Dad," Agatha tried to take my hand, but I yanked it away. "There's just no room in your room for all that stuff. We kept the most valuable things." "Who decides what's valuable and what isn't?" "Well," she hesitated. "Hubert and I, of course. And Heather helped. She has good taste. Heather, a woman who thought classic literature was dusty junk and vinyl records were junk that only took up space." I could imagine her disposing of my stuff. "And Shakespeare?" I asked, afraid to hear the answer. "How is he?" "Oh, he's fine," Hubert hastened to assure me. Getting used to his new home. You keep him in the garage?" I looked straight into my son's eyes, knowing he couldn't bear to look at me. "No, no you don't," he averted his eyes. "He lives in the house. We just don't let him in certain rooms. You know I'm allergic." I knew that was a lie. Hubert would never allow a cat to roam freely in the house. Most likely, Shakespeare really did live in the garage, or he'd been given to a shelter. "I want to see him," I said. "Bring him next time." "Daddy, you can't bring animals in here," Agatha reminded me. "It's against the rules." "Then I'll come to you," I insisted. "Next Sunday." Again, we exchanged glances. "Actually," Hubert began cautiously, "it's not advisable for you to travel yet. The doctor said you need time to adapt to your new surroundings." "What doctor?" I didn't remember being seen by a doctor since I'd moved. "Dr. Peterson," Agatha said the name confidently, as if it meant something to me. "He came to see you on Tuesday. You don't remember." I didn't remember any Dr. Peterson. Either he never came by, or my memory was really messed up. That was the thought that scared me the most. After they left, I sat at the window for a long time, watching their car pull out of the parking lot. A feeling of helplessness came over me. I had lost my home, lost my cat, lost even the right to decide when and where I could go. It was as if overnight I had gone from an adult to a helpless child. A week went by like that, then another. I'd accepted the Sunny Hills schedule. Up at 6 in the morning, breakfast at 7, group physical therapy at 9, lunch at 12, quiet time from 1 to 3, dinner at 5, and bedtime at 9 in the evening, just like in the army or prison. The only outlet was the hours between quiet hour and dinner, when I could sit in the common parlor and read the books I had managed to save. It was there, in the parlor, that I met Quentin Hodges. He was sitting in a chair by the window, reading a newspaper, and looked like a man who knew exactly what he was doing in this place, unlike most of the residents who wandered the hallways with a lost look. "New?" he asked as I sat down in a nearby chair with my book. "Third week," I answered. "Quentin Hodges." He extended his hand for a handshake. "Former attorney, specialized in real estate and wills." "Wilbur Farrington," I shook his hand. "Former history teacher." "History," he smiled. "A useful science. Teaches us that nothing lasts forever, neither empires nor prisons." I looked at him more closely. He had a sharp mind in his eyes, unclouded by age. "Do you consider this place a prison?" I asked quietly. "Don't you?" He grinned. "Schedules, wardens in white coats, restricted movement. What's not a prison? At least here they feed you regularly, which is not bad." I smiled involuntarily. This man was saying out loud what I'd been thinking all these weeks. "How did you get here?" I asked. "Oh, standard story." He folded the paper. "My wife died. My kids decided I couldn't live alone, sold my house, and they sent me here. Classic scenario." "It's the same for me," I nodded. "That's what I thought." Quentin looked at me appraisingly. "You have the same look as all the newcomers. A mixture of confusion and anger. It fades with time. All that remains is humility." "I don't want to be humbled," I said quietly. "That's right," he nodded approvingly. "Humility is a slow death, especially in a place like this." We talked until just before dinner. Quentin told me he'd been living in Sunny Hills for 3 years. His kids, like mine, had sold their parents' house and now came to visit once a month to clear their conscience, as he put it. "The lousy part," he said, lowering his voice, "is that they could afford a better place. There are some people here who really have no choice, no money, no relatives. But most ended up here because it was more profitable for their kids to put them in the cheapest place and embezzle the rest of the money from the estate sale." "My house is worth a lot," I nodded. You could live in a much better place with that money. Or you could stay in your own house with a nurse, Quentin added. But then the children would get nothing. That's the problem. After dinner, we went to our rooms, but the next day we met again in the living room. And every day after that, Quentin became my guide to the world of Sunny Hills. He knew everything. Which of the staff took bribes for extra services, which of the residents could borrow a book, how to get around the ban on alcohol. One of the orderlies had a constant supply of whiskey, which he sold for double the price. A week after we met, as we sat in the far corner of the garden, or rather, the patch of stunted bushes called a garden, Quentin suddenly asked, "Who issued the power of attorney for the management of your property?" I wondered. I had signed some documents at the hospital, but I didn't remember exactly what they were. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I think it was a temporary guardianship for Hubert, my son." "Temporary?" Quentin raised an eyebrow. "Did you still have the document?" "No, they took it." He shook his head. "That's bad, very bad. It was probably not a temporary guardianship, but a full power of attorney to manage your assets. Now your son can do whatever he wants with your assets." "But I'm not incapacitated." I was outraged. "I'm sane." "That's from your point of view," Quentin grinned. "From their point of view, you're an old man with memory problems who falls in the bathtub and can't take care of himself. I bet they've already found a doctor to certify that you can't make financial decisions for yourself." I remembered the mysterious Dr. Peterson I'd never seen. "I guess so," I admitted grimly. "Don't despair," Quentin patted my shoulder. "There are ways around it. I didn't practice as an estate and probate lawyer for 30 years for nothing. I know all the loopholes." Quentin's plan was simple and ingenious at the same time. As he explained, the power of attorney I signed gave Hubert the right to act on my behalf, but it did not deprive me of that right. In essence, we both had an equal opportunity to manage my estate, and until Hubert had me declared incompetent by the court, I could still sign documents. "The key is to get ahead of them," Quentin said as we sat in the far corner of the garden away from prying ears. "You must act quickly and discreetly. If they find out about your plans before they're realized, they'll run to the judge and declare you incompetent." "But how can I do anything while I'm here?" I asked. "I can't just walk out and go to the bank or the realtor." "You don't have to," Quentin smiled slyly. "We'll find a way to get in touch with the right people. I have, shall we say, connections among the staff." Those connections turned out to be Nurse Louise, a full-figured woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a constant lack of money to support her 3 children. For a small fee, she agreed to bring us things from the will and let us use her phone. Quentin paid her from his meager savings, which he kept in a stash under his mattress. "It's an investment in our future," he said when I tried to object. "When you get your money back, you'll get mine back." The first thing we had to do was to find out exactly what document I had signed and what rights it gave Hubert. Louise agreed to call the notary's office, identifying herself as the lawyer's secretary, and request a copy of the power of attorney. To our surprise, it worked. She was sent a scan to her email. When I saw the document, I realized how naive I had been. It was not a temporary guardianship, but a full general power of attorney, giving Hubert the right to manage all of my assets, including real estate, bank accounts, securities, and personal belongings. He could sell, buy, gift, mortgage, anything. "What a creep," I hissed, looking at the document on Louise's phone. "He had me completely fooled." "Not exactly," Quentin scrutinized the text. "There's no sole power of attorney clause. You still retain the same rights as him, and most importantly, there is no prohibition against revoking the power of attorney. You can revoke it at any time." "I can revoke it at any time." I felt hope rising in me. "Yeah, but if you just revoke it now, they'll run to the judge and have you declared incompetent." Quentin shook his head. "We need to be more subtle. We need to secure your assets first and then go through the legal formalities. On Quentin's advice, the first thing we did was to contact a realtor, not the one who had worked with my children, but a competing firm from a neighboring town. Louise provided her phone number and I called, identifying myself as a potential real estate seller. Mr. Farrington, Vanessa King, a realtor with 20 years of experience, said politely, "Are you sure you want to sell the house? Your address already has an active listing with another agency." What? I was shocked. What listing? Your house is already listed for sale through the Dream Home Agency. It was listed 2 weeks ago. I almost dropped my phone. They were already selling my house without telling me. Quentin, seeing my condition, picked up the phone. "Miss King, I'm a friend of Mr. Farrington's," he said calmly. "There's been a slight misunderstanding. His son, with power of attorney, has put the house up for sale without authorizing it properly. Mr. Farrington would like to withdraw that listing and work directly with you. Is that possible?" "The situation is delicate," Vanessa replied after a pause. "But technically, if Mr. Farrington retains the right to dispose of his assets, he can terminate his contract with one agency and enter into another. It would require a face-to-face meeting and some paperwork. Mr. Farrington is in a medical facility right now and can't come in person," Quentin explained, "but you could come to him." After some negotiation, Vanessa agreed to come to Sunny Hills the next day. Louise had organized a meeting in the staff lounge where residents were not usually allowed, but she made an exception for an extra fee. Vanessa turned out to be a middle-aged businesswoman with a sharp eye and quick movements. She brought out a pile of paperwork and patiently explained all the details to me. "Your house is appraised at $480,000, she said. "But in the current listing, it's listed for $420. That's not a bad price, but it's below market value. I think your son just wanted to sell faster. Or to get something from the agent for a discount," Quentin muttered. "I can't comment on motives," Vanessa replied diplomatically. "But if you want the best value, I'd recommend $500,000, with the possibility of bidding up to $480. The market is active right now, especially in your neighborhood." I signed all the necessary documents revoking the listing from the former agency and appointing Vanessa as my exclusive representative. She promised to get on the case immediately and keep me informed through Louise. "Are you sure you want to sell?" she asked before she left. "It's a big decision." "I'm absolutely sure," I replied firmly. "The house means a lot to me, but now it's more important to secure my future." 3 days later, Vanessa told me that she had received an offer from a young family, $495,000, almost the full asking price. They were ready to close the deal quickly, within a month, which was in line with our plans. "Now we have to decide on the money," Quentin said as we discussed the next steps. "If the funds go into your regular account, Hubert will have access to them by proxy." Louise came to the rescue again. She agreed to drive me to the bank on her day off, presenting it as an authorized trip to the doctor. At the bank, I opened a new account in my name, but at a different branch that Hubert didn't know about. I also changed all the contact details, giving Louise's address and phone number for correspondence. Vanessa organized the signing of the house sale documents right in Sunny Hills. The buyers, Michael and Sarah Donovan, a young couple with a young son, were surprised at the venue but didn't ask too many questions. They seemed happy as they discussed what kind of nursery they would make for their boy and how they would set up the garden for family barbecues. "Aren't you worried about selling your house?" Sarah asked me when we'd finished the paperwork. "There must be so many memories associated with it." "The memories will stay with me," I answered. "And the house needs a new family, new stories. Take care of it." When the money from the sale arrived in my new account, I felt a strange relief. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted off me. The house was sold, but it was my choice, my decision. I was back in control of my life, albeit from a room in a nursing home. The next step, according to Quentin's plan, was to secure a comfortable future for myself. I transferred some of the money to the Sunny Hills account, paying for 3 years' rent in advance, but with the condition that the conditions would be improved by moving me to a larger room with a private bath and a balcony. The director of the establishment, Mr. Parker, was surprised, but did not refuse the money. "Usually it's the relatives who pay," he said as he examined my application. "In my case, I'm in charge of my own finances," I replied firmly, "and I prefer to decide what I spend it on." By the end of the week, I was moved to a new room, spacious, bright, and overlooking the garden instead of the parking lot. I ordered several pieces of furniture through Louise, bookshelves, a new TV, an upholstered armchair. My cell was gradually turning into a decent place to live. Hubert and Agatha arrived on Sunday, as usual. They were shocked to see me in my new room, surrounded by new things. "What's going on here?" Hubert looked around in bewilderment. "Where did all this stuff come from? How did you move in?" "Oh, I made an arrangement with the administration," I said carelessly. "It turns out that you can live here quite comfortably if you get it right." "But," Agatha hesitated, "it costs money. Where did you get the money?" "I've always had money, my dear," I smiled. "It's just that you used to use it as you saw fit. Now I've decided to take care of my own comfort." They looked at each other, the same familiar exchange of looks, but now it was one of concern instead of self-assurance. "Did you sell something?" Hubert asked cautiously. "Anything of value from the house?" "You could say that," I answered evasively. "Don't worry, everything is legal. I have a power of attorney to dispose of my property. Just like you, Hubert." My son's face stretched. He obviously didn't expect me to know the details of the document he signed at the hospital. "Dad, what have you done?" Agatha sounded panicked. "Tell us the truth." "Nothing you wouldn't do." I looked them both in the eye. "I just made a decision about my future, just like you once did." They left earlier than usual, clearly disturbed. I knew they'd go straight to check on the house and they'd soon find out the truth. But by then, nothing could be changed. The deal was closed, the money had been transferred, the documents had been signed. Quentin was delighted with my antics. When I told him about the kids' visit, he laughed a long time, slapping himself on his knees. "I can imagine their faces when they arrive at the house and see the other family there," he said, wiping away the tears that came out of his laughter. "It will be a spectacle." "I don't want to humiliate them," I admitted. "I just want to be in control of my life." "After they put you in here and tried to sell your house behind your back?" Quentin shook his head. "You're too kind, Wilbur, but that's your strength." That same evening I met Dorothea Mallory. She was sitting in the drawing room with a book, and I immediately noticed her choice Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, one of Elizabeth's favorite books. "Good choice," I said as I approached her chair. "Sad story, though." She looked up, her eyes clear and gray with wrinkles in the corners from her frequent smiles. "All love stories are a little sad," she replied. "Otherwise it's not love, it's just entertainment." We got to talking. Dorothea, who was 74, had worked all her life as a librarian at the Champlain City Library. She knew everything about books, not only the contents but also the histories of publication, interesting facts about authors, literary connections between works. "How did you end up here?" I asked when our conversation turned from literature to the personal. "My house burned down last winter," she answered simply. "Faulty wiring. The insurance was enough to pay for the place, but not enough to buy a new place. And the kids lived too far away, one in California, the other in Europe." "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "Don't be," she smiled. "I lost things, but not my memories. And not all the books. Some of them were at work in the library. I kept my favorites there to reread on my lunch break." We talked until bedtime, and the next day we met again. Dorothea turned out to be an amazing person, well-read, intelligent, with a subtle sense of humor and without a drop of self-pity, despite all the difficulties. Life doesn't end until we decide it's over, she once said. Even in a place like this, you can find joy. In books, in conversation, in the small daily discoveries. She was easy to be with. She didn't demand explanations, didn't ask uncomfortable questions, didn't try to give unsolicited advice. We simply enjoyed each other's company, discussing books, music, movies, sharing memories of the past without touching on painful topics. Quentin, noticing our friendship, nodded approvingly. Dorothea is a good person, he said. There aren't many of them left. Hold on to her, Wilbur. I wasn't about to let go. Every day I appreciated our conversations more and more, her soft voice, her ability to find the right words for any situation. She reminded me of Elizabeth not outwardly, but with something elusive, an inner light that warmed even on the darkest days. A week after the sale of the house, Hubert called me. I had been expecting this call and was ready to talk. You sold the house, he said without preamble, in a voice full of restrained rage. Our family home. How could you? The same way you could put me here against my will, I answered calmly. The same way you could put the house up for sale without saying a word to me. That's different. Hubert was indignant. We were doing it for your good. Really? I grinned. Not to get the money from the sale of the house. By the way, why did you appraise it at $420,000 when its real value is almost $500? There was silence in the receiver. Then Hubert spoke in a different tone, businesslike, calculating. All right, what's done is done. Where's the money? It should go to keep you here. I've already taken care of that, I answered. I've paid for 3 years' accommodation with better conditions. And the rest? There was greed in his voice. Where's the rest of the money? In a safe place, I said. Don't worry, I won't spend it on anything stupid. I have a plan. What plan? Hubert sounded worried now. Dad, you can't just dispose of that amount of money like that. You can make a mistake, make the wrong decision. Like you did when you decided to sell the house for less than it was worth, I interrupted. Or like you and Agatha did when you decided to put me in the cheapest nursing home when you could have chosen a better one. That's not fair. Hubert's voice sounded resentful. We did the best we could. No, I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. You did what was convenient and profitable for you. Now I will do what I think is right. After that conversation, I expected an immediate reaction attempts to declare me incompetent, revoke my disposition rights, maybe even transfer me to another institution. But nothing happened. Hubert and Agatha did not come the following Sunday, nor did they call or send a message through the staff. They're analyzing the situation, Quentin explained when I shared my observations with him, trying to figure out how much money you have left and if it's worth the fight. If the amount is small, they might just wave goodbye and leave you alone. But if it's big, then they'll look for ways to get to it, he shrugged. But you've already secured yourself. The money's in a new account they can't access. The living expenses are paid for years in advance. What can they do? Declare me incompetent retroactively and contest the deal? It's hard, Quentin shook his head. You'd have to have solid proof that you were incapacitated when you signed the papers, and they don't have that proof. Otherwise, they would have done it long ago. I hoped he was right. In any case, I now had the time and resources to prepare for any turn of events. The days at Sunny Hills began to pass more pleasantly. My new room was a real refuge, with books, a comfortable chair, and good lighting. I could invite Dorothea to tea and we would talk for hours, sitting on the little balcony, looking out over the garden and discussing the books we had read. You've changed, she remarked one day. When we first met, there was bitterness in you. Now it's almost gone. Maybe, I agreed. I found a way to regain control of my life, and I met you. She smiled, and there was something in that smile that I hadn't seen in a long time: warmth, understanding, acceptance, something I'd missed since Elizabeth was gone. Life is full of surprises, Dorothea said, taking my hand. Even when it seems to be over, it can bring something new and wonderful. I squeezed her fingers, feeling something inside me thaw something that had been frozen since the day I'd buried my wife. Dorothea wasn't replacing Elizabeth. No one could do that. But she was bringing a new light into my life, a new joy that I no longer hoped to find. They came 2 weeks after my conversation with Hubert on the phone. Not just Hubert and Agatha, but their spouses, Heather and Bradford. A whole delegation, just like the day they had their family council. Only now they didn't look like self-righteous conspirators, but angry accusers. I waited for them in the common living room. Quentin had insisted that the meeting be held in a public place. Less chance of them making a scene, he said. Dorothea sat nearby, pretending to read a book, but I knew she was watching, ready to help if needed. "Daddy, we need to have a serious talk," Agatha began as soon as they approached. Her voice sounded tense, like a string ready to burst. "Preferably in your room, alone." "I'm fine here," I replied calmly. "If you want to talk, sit down." They sat down around me reluctantly. Hubert looked like he was about to explode. Heather twirled her wedding ring nervously, and Bradford looked businesslike, but the jowls in his cheekbones showed tension. "You sold the house," Hubert began without preamble. "Our family home, the house where we grew up, and you didn't say a word to us." "Just like you didn't say a word to me when you decided to put me here," I countered. "Or when you tried to sell the house yourself through your agency." "That's completely different," Agatha exclaimed. "We were doing it for your own good." "Were we?" I looked her straight in the eye. "Not to get the money from the sale of the house? By the way, Hubert, why did you put it up for $420,000 when it's worth almost $500? Hubert blushed, but remained silent. Bradford decided to intervene, turning on his professional financial advisor tone. "Wilbur, let's look at things rationally. The money from the sale of your house is your financial safety cushion. They need to be properly invested and managed to ensure you have a comfortable old age. And who's going to manage it? You, Bradford?" I grinned. "So that they end up in your accounts and not mine." "Papa," Agatha said indignantly, "how can you say that? We're your children." "That's why I expected more from you," I replied. "Caring, respect, honesty. Not that you'd try to stick me in the cheapest nursing home and sell my house behind my back." "We cared about you." Hubert slammed his fist on the arm of his chair. "You weren't supposed to be alone after that accident in the bathroom." "It was an accident," I said calmly. "It happens to everyone. But instead of hiring a nurse or helping me yourself, you took the easiest way to get rid of me by putting me here and getting the house." "That's not true." Agatha looked offended, but there was guilt in her eyes. "We wanted you to be taken care of by professionals." "Professionals?" I circled the living room, pointing to the peeling paint on the walls, the worn furniture, the broken TV in the corner. "This place is the cheapest place in the neighborhood. You didn't even bother to find something decent. And why is that? Because you wanted to save me money. Or rather, money you already thought was yours." There was a heavy silence. The other residents of the nursing home began to look in our direction with interest, attracted by the raised tones. "Okay," Hubert cut to the chase. "What's done is done. The house is sold. Now the main thing is to manage the money properly. Where is it now?" "In a safe place," I answered. "And it's already been distributed." "Allocated?" Heather stepped forward. "What does that mean?" "I've decided how to spend the money from the sale of the house," I explained. "Some of it's already spent, some of it's set aside for future expenses." "But it's a lot of money," Bradford exclaimed. "Almost $500,000. What could you spend it on?" "On my life," I answered simply. "On what is important to me." "We need details," Hubert demanded. "Specific numbers. Where did the money go?" I smiled. I'd been waiting for this moment, the moment when I could finally say everything I had accumulated over the years. I'd love to tell you, I began. First of all, I paid for 3 years accommodation here, but with better conditions. Now I have a great room with a balcony and a private bath. It wasn't cheap, but it's worth it. That's reasonable. Bradford nodded with visible relief. And the rest? Some of the money I donated to charity, I continued. 100,000 to the city library for the renovation of the collection. They're going to name the new reading room after Elizabeth. 100,000? Agatha looked like she'd been punched. But, why? Because Elizabeth loved books, I answered. And because it was important to me to preserve her name, her memory. Which, by the way, you've never tried to do. You don't even mention her when you talk to me. They looked at each other in embarrassment. I was right, and they knew it. Another 75,000 went to establish a scholarship fund at the school where I taught, I continued, for students who want to study history in college but can't afford it. But that's, Hubert began. Another 50,000 I put into the account of the animal shelter, I interrupted him. In memory of Shakespeare, whom, by the way, you gave there instead of taking care of him as you promised. Hubert turned pale. He didn't know that I was aware of my cat's fate. That's not true, he tried to object. Shakespeare lives with us. Don't lie to me, Hubert, I cut him off. I have friends in this town. I know that you took Shakespeare to the orphanage a week after I moved here. Luckily, a good family had already taken him in. Hubert fell silent, ashamed. Agatha looked at him with surprise. Apparently he hadn't told her the truth about the cat's fate. And the rest of the money? Bradford asked, trying to get the conversation back on track. There should be about 250,000 more. That's right, I nodded. It'll stay in my account for personal expenses. For example, I'm planning a trip. A trip? Heather didn't hide her bewilderment. At your age? Exactly, I smiled. With my new friend Dorothea. We want to visit Europe, London, Paris, Rome, maybe Athens, places we've read about in books but never seen with our own eyes. I nodded toward Dorothea, who immediately looked up from her book and waved at us. My family turned around and stared at her in bewilderment. You're going to spend 250,000 on traveling with some woman you barely know. Agatha looked like she was going to faint. I know Dorothea well enough to know that she's a wonderful person, I answered. Much better than most people I've known all my life. This stone in their garden did not go unnoticed. Hubert blushed with anger. Agatha bit her lip. It's irresponsible, Bradford said. Spending that kind of money on entertainment when it could secure your future. My future is already secure, I argued. I've paid to live here for years to come. I have everything I need. Now I want to enjoy what time I have left. Isn't that natural? What about the inheritance? Hubert asked bluntly. What will be left to us? Here it is, the moment of truth. I looked at them, at my children, at their spouses, at their greedy, calculating faces, and I felt no anger, no resentment, but only fatigue and disappointment. Nothing, I said calmly. There will be nothing left for you. Whatever is left after my death will go to charity. I've already made a will and appointed Quentin Hodges, a former lawyer who lives here, as executor. He'll make sure my wishes are carried out. I nodded toward Quentin, who was sitting at the other end of the room, pretending to read the newspaper but watching us closely. You can't do this, Agatha whispered. We are your children. The children who put me in a nursing home against my will, I reminded her. The kids who tried to sell my house without saying a word to me. The kids who gave my cat to a shelter even though they promised to take care of him. We took care of you, Hubert exclaimed. We did everything for your good. No, I shook my head. You did what was convenient and profitable for you. You never asked what I wanted. You were never interested in my feelings, my desires. To you, I was just an old man to inherit from. It's not fair, Agatha began to cry. We always loved you. Maybe, I agreed, in our own way. But your love was always with conditions. It's always been about what you can get from me, not what you can give. There was a heavy silence. No one knew what to say. Finally, Bradford cleared his throat. "We can contest the will," he said. "Prove that you're out of your mind." "You could try," I shrugged. "But it won't work. I had a full medical examination 2 weeks ago, including a psychiatric evaluation. The results are in my chart. I'm fully competent. In addition, I recorded our conversation today." I pointed to the small tape recorder lying on the table beside me. It was Quentin's idea to have proof in case they tried to challenge my decision. You planned this whole thing." Hubert looked shocked. "You've been playing a game with us all this time." "I just took back control of my life," I replied. "The control you tried to take away from me. They realized they had lost." Hubert stood up, followed by the others. They looked confused, angry, disappointed. "Is this your last word?" Hubert asked. "Are you really going to leave your children without an inheritance?" "My decision is final," I confirmed. "But if you really want something from me, I can offer something more valuable than money." "What?" Hubert asked suspiciously. "A lesson," I replied. "A lesson about what is really important in life. Not money, not possessions, but relationships, caring, respect. Something you've never shown me, especially in recent years." "Let's go." Heather tugged Hubert's sleeve. "There's nothing more to do here." They left without saying goodbye. I watched them go, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness that my relationship with my children had ended like this, with bitterness and recriminations, and relief that I had finally expressed everything I had accumulated over the years. Dorothea came over and sat down next to me, taking my hand. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I answered, squeezing her fingers. For the first time in a long time, I was really okay. Quentin joined us, rubbing his hands together. "Well played, Wilbur," he praised. "You got 'em. Did you see their faces when you told them about the charity? Priceless." "I didn't mean to wow them," I countered. "I just wanted them to realize that I can't be treated like that I'm still a human being who deserves respect and dignity." "And you got it," Dorothea nodded. "It wasn't easy, but it was necessary." The three of us were sitting around discussing what had happened when Nurse Louise came up to us. "Mr. Farrington," she said with a smile, "your request has been approved. You and Miss Mallory can visit the town library this Saturday. Transportation has been arranged." "Thank you, Louise," I smiled back. "That's great news." When she left, Dorothea looked at me with shining eyes. "Really? Are we really going to the library?" "Of course," I nodded, I promised. "And this is just the beginning. Soon we'll be able to go anywhere we want, to a museum, to the theater, even to other countries. We have the resources and the time. What else do we need?" "Only the company of good people," she smiled, looking at Quentin and me. "And I already have that. It's been 6 months since that confrontation. Hubert and Agatha haven't called, haven't visited, haven't made themselves known. I've heard from mutual friends that they tried to contest my will, but to no avail. My medical tests and recorded conversation left them no chance. My life had changed beyond recognition. Dorothea and I now lived in adjoining rooms with a shared living room, a small remodeling I had paid for out of my savings. Our rooms were full of books, music, and coziness, not like the standard hospital rooms they used to be. We often went out on the town, to the library, to the theater, to restaurants. Quentin sometimes joined us, but more often stayed at Sunny Hills, saying he didn't want to be a third extra. Dorothea and I made plans for a big trip, Europe, which we had both dreamed of all our lives. London with its museums and theaters, Paris with its cafes and galleries, Rome with its ancient history, places we'd read about in books but never seen with our own eyes. "Isn't it too late for such adventures?" she asked one day when we were looking at the guidebooks. "It's never too late for adventure," I replied. "As long as we are alive, we can discover new things." Isn't that what life is all about? She smiled and took my hand. She had the same feeling in her eyes that I had. The joy of an unexpected second chance, of starting something new even at our age. Sometimes I thought about my children, about how things might have turned out differently if they had chosen a different path, if they had shown care and respect instead of greed and calculation. I was sad that our relationship ended on such a note, but I didn't regret my decision. They made their choice. I made mine. They wanted my house and my money and got nothing. I wanted control over my life and respect for my decisions, and I got even more. A new life, new friends, new love. Looking at Dorothea, who was reading passionately about the sights of Paris, I thought about how strangely life works, how what seems like the end, losing your home, moving into a nursing home, can be the beginning of something new and beautiful, how you can find happiness where you least expect it. That was my last laugh. Not a gloating laugh, not a vengeful laugh, but the laugh of a man who has finally found his way, his freedom, his joy. And no one, not the children with their greed, not age with its limitations, could take that away from me.